Thank you for joining Horizon multi-site considerations. Anyone is doing Horizon? Multi-site? Active-active, active-passive? OK, that's good. So we're going to concentrate on active-active in this presentation because everyone in VMware is saying that it's not supported, and we have to do something about that. So let's start by defining what is multi-site. So when I say multi-site, it's not a stretched cluster. It's not something that is on a layer 2 network. Well, actually, I'll talk about that more often. It's dispersed services that you want to provide to users in a different city, country, geographical location, or continent. It might be the same. It might be different. So it depends on how you want to segregate your workloads. So what are our multi-site scenarios? We have active-passive, which I'm sure most of 99% of customers are running that. We have active-active seamless. And when I say seamless, I mean zero intervention. This is the most hard to achieve. It's the most expensive. And this is where we have to do lots of workarounds to get it working. And I'll discuss that in a moment. We have active-active split. When I say split, it means I'm going to pin users to specific sites. OK? And then every site is a failover to another site. And stretch sites. So how you determine how you want to implement stretch sites determines what considerations you need to apply. Because when you have a stretch site, you might decide, yes, I want to split my servers, which Horizon does not support, unfortunately. Or I want to consider this as one site because I have very low latency, I have very high throughput and bandwidth, so I can consider them one site and move forward. So how you try to configure stretch sites determines what considerations you need to apply. Now, obviously, we only have 12 minutes. We cannot talk about all considerations. I'll talk about important parts, applications. From the start, if your application does not support active-active writes between sites, then don't proceed with anything related to VDI. Your application, that being web or on-prem or written specifically for you, it has to support read and write from different locations. There's nothing from VDI perspective or VMware perspective that you can do about that. You've got your network, your WAN latency, throughput. This is very important. Your RPO and RTO for your sites. You've got your what kind of ports you want to do, floating or dedicated. Global server load balancing, Active Directory, replication, user experience. All of these are things you have to touch base on before you start deciding if I want to do active-active or active-passive. Now, in this presentation, because we have very limited time, I'm going to touch base on global server load balancing and profiles and data. Fair enough? OK. So who's familiar with GSLB? OK. So global server load balancing is just smart DNS. Fine? I want to route users to a specific site. How do I do that? I have multiple sites, and my user needs to hit one URL, right? So what determines which site is this user going to be forwarded to? This is called GSLB, Global Server Load Balancing. And the standard way we do GSLB is we do multiple application delivery controllers in every site, that being Citrix NetScaler, F5, Kemp, or NSX. OK? Now, NSX does not support GSLB. We do front-end and back-end load balancing. But for GSLB, you need an application delivery controller. And inside that ADC, you need a specific license. And this is very, very expensive. OK? So you need to maintain these devices to ensure that your users are forwarded to different sites. More so, you need to delegate your URL, public URL, to specific sites. So if I choose horizon.vmware.com, I'm going to tell my public DNS, anything coming to horizon.vmware.com, this is your authoritative DNS, this site and this site. This is how it can determine which site you're going to be forwarded to. Now, in every site, you're going to have 2 unified access gateways, fine? Regardless of how many sites you have. You're going to have 2 connection servers at least, depending on the number of users you're going to have. And if you're running workspace 1, you need, of course, what? Identity manager, right? And you need a minimum of 3 of those in every site. Fine? Now, we want a better way of doing GSLB. Why? Because I don't want to pay a lot of money for a very simple DNS service. And this is where cloud comes into play, right? Everything is cloud now. So we have to do something with cloud. So you have 2 services that can support GSLB without doing any DNS delegation and with paying very, very minimal services. You've got Microsoft Azure Traffic Manager, and you've got Amazon Route 53. Now, these are public services. They're very, very, very cheap. Now, if you take the service for 1,000 years, you would not be paying for one application delivery controller. for doing GSLB. And when you do cloud GSLB, you don't need to do any delegation of your zones. Why? Because this is a public DNS server. So you don't have to delegate your internal zones to your internal application delivery controllers. What happens is that you configure GSLB, and I'll show you how it's configured on Azure, just for an example, and you get an Azure URL. Why? Because it's a public DNS. You create a CNAME for that Azure DNS. A CNAME is something that is hosted on your public domain, horizon.mydomain.com. And what it does, it looks at performance metrics. If you choose to configure it as performance metrics, you have weight option. Say, take 60% of users to one site and 40% of users to another site. You have pure active passive. Always take to this site. If it's down, go to another site. So what this will do is continuously monitor your service. And when it's down, it will forward users to the other site. OK? So you create a CNAME, and that's it. You can do this configuration in 5 minutes. I guarantee you, if you go to GSLB and you want to do the normal route for GSLB, it would take you at least 3 to 4 hours of configuring, aside from having to pay lots of money for Netscaler Platinum or F5 GTM licenses. I have a OK, let me talk about considerations, then I go to the video. So Cloud GSLB does not support user pinning, right? How can I determine which user goes to which site based on their Active Directory user or group? That is not possible with cloud. With F5 and Netscaler, it is possible, but not out of the box. You have to do some content switching, and you have to do some advanced URL rewrites to achieve that. With cloud, it's not possible. Cloud GSLB is very cheap. You can run 1 million query for $4 a month. This is million query if you have 1,000 users and they hit your URL 1,000 times every day. So that is never going to happen. So $4 is very cheap. And it's less than $4. I just want it to be on the safe side. Don't always decrease your endpoint monitoring, right? You don't want your primary site, if it goes down for 10 seconds, to fail over all of your users to a second site, right? You need to have, let's say, a logical RPO and RTO for failing over users. So let's say I set my monitor to 1 minute, which I see very reasonable. My router goes down for 2 minutes. All of my users are being forwarded to the other site until another minute passes, and then the GSLB says, OK, my service is up again. I can reroute users to the other site. So just don't put it 1 second or 2 seconds, because it doesn't make sense. Make sure to put an app consistent path. So when your GSLB is monitoring your service, it's not just monitoring your web server, right? Because your IaaS server or Apache server can be up, but your application inside the server can be down. So you need to put a full path to something that represents an application. With Horizon, we have a path, an icon path inside Horizon Connection Server, which makes sure that the service is up and running. OK, this is a big one. If you're doing the full workspace suite, you need 2 GSLB addresses, one for Identity Manager and one for Horizon. OK? Now, if you're only going to use Identity Manager web, so you're not going to use the Horizon client. You don't want users to put a URL in the Horizon client. Everyone opens Identity Manager or Workspace 1, as they like to call it, and you click on an icon and your virtual desktop opens. You can have only one GSLB address, which is the Identity Manager. If you want to configure your Horizon client with an address only for pure VDI, you need 2 GSLB addresses, one for access gateways and one for Identity Manager. Andrew Morgan from VMware wrote a blog on how to do this on AWS. My blog is dr.online. I'm going to write one today on how to do it on Microsoft Azure, but I have a video for you on how it's done. Okay, this is a fast-forwarded video because we don't have lots of time. So this is done in 5 minutes. I've done this in 1 minute. You create a traffic manager profile. What do you want? You named your profile. Anything, because you're going to use CNAMEs to forward your traffic. So it doesn't matter what you name it. It takes around 15 seconds to do so. And I want my service to be HTTPS 443, which is what UAG. This is the path I told you about to monitor the actual service. And I want to go with performance. I add an external endpoint, and I point it to my public URL, which is natted to my UAG. I have 2 sites, Dubai and Abu Dhabi. They're in the same country, different cities. And you link those sites to a locations. Now, of course, your cloud might not have a location beside your data center, so choose the nearest one. This is not important, so what I did is I embedded a script inside HTML5 portal, which would give me latency for users. So I would get how much latency for every connecting users from Azure portal. It's not mandatory, but you can do that. These are my endpoints. I have both of them online. I'm going to connect to my URL. I'm going to create a CNAME from my public DNS to the DNS provided by Azure, which is something.trafficmanager.net. So now I disabled the service. I'm going to go inside one of them, and I'm going to disable a site. Now I'm forwarded to another site, which is called Abu Dhabi. And I get another site. Now, if I disable the second one, if I have multiple sites, it will keep failing me over to the active sites. Okay? So, user profiles and data, this is where I want to concentrate, because this is the most difficult part when you do active-active. Okay? Microsoft in 2010 released a KB saying we do not support replicating profiles. Okay? Every EUC architect I've met says do not use DFS, namespace, or replication. I beg to differ. I say DFS is your friend. You need to use DFS. DFS replication is the only way you can do active-active. Why is that? Because DFS replication works in last write wins. So when I do a last write from any site, this is the last write win that will replicate to another site. Other SANs or NAS or other replication mechanisms does not have this mechanism. So I have full mesh replication. I have 5 sets replicating to each other. And last write wins makes sure that if my user is logged into site 3, he does some change, this change is replicated to all sites. If he logs into site 1 and does a change on the same file, because it's the last write he did, it will replicate to other sites. This is something I will put on my blog if you want to play with this or change it. It's a small architecture I did for seamless active-active. How can we configure that? First thing is first, don't configure namespace. Okay? Just configure replication. You create a local share on every site. All your virtual desktops are in different OUs. So every site has an OU. Inside every OU, you have virtual desktops that are created in that specific site. Okay? And you give access to those users. Now, your group policy applies specifically to that OU, okay? And you point that OU to this group policy, to this folder redirection policy. Makes sense? Because I don't have much time. So I create a file server cluster in every site. I use DFS only for replication, not namespace. I point my group policy for UEM and folder redirection to that specific share in that site. Now, user hits GSLB. GSLB will forward that user to any given site because it's active-active. They'll hit their connection server. They'll open a virtual desktop. That virtual desktop is inside this OU. This OU has this group policy applying. So I make sure that this is only applying to this file server. It will never go to this file server because I don't have a namespace here. I only have the file server cluster in that site. Now, what happens is that if a user logs off from here, user logs in here, same things. Virtual desktop is in this OU. It's going to apply this group policy, which only loads my profile from this file server. Fine? And these are replicating through DFS replication. Now, very big consideration, RPO and RTO. How can I know if my user moves in to the second site that the change he has done here has replicated here? Your RPO has to be in coordinates with your WAN latency, throughput, and bandwidth. This is very important. How do I calculate that? I don't have time anymore, I'm sorry. So I make sure that my change rate per day and number of users assumes up to my WAN bandwidth and throughput. So I have 50 MB. My users are having a change per day of 10 MB. I have 5 users, 10 users, 200 users. I can calculate that change. And second thing I want to tell you is that always make sure that your sites are far. So if a user moves to another site, you have a couple of hours or a day or something. If they travel, it can replicate changes. Make sense? DFS should always be full mesh. You should never use namespace. Point your group policies and UEM configuration to that specific site. If you want more details, this is very detailed in 2 blogs. And I have a video. I'll run it very fast because I have only 1 minute. This is called Abu Dhabi site. I have 2 sites. Every site has a specific OU and virtual desktops created in that OU. My group policy is applying to every OU, and it's specific to those virtual desktops created in that specific OU. My UEM folder direction points only to the local file server cluster, not a namespace, not anything else. I'm going to log into one site. OK, I'm out of time. So I'm going to upload this to my 10 minutes is not enough. I'm going to upload this to my blog, and you can access that blog. It's called dr.online. And you can find both of these configurations and videos on how to configure that. And I guarantee you, if you follow these specific tasks, you're going to have an active environment, which is supported by Microsoft and by VMware, and it works seamlessly for sure. Thank you.